the boy who felt silence. The world clamored, but Billy remained insulated. Not in the conventional sense. The clamor registered as a pulse beneath his scuffed sneakers as the city bus thundered past, a phantom tickle against his skin when Mrs. Henderson's gossip spilled into the afternoon air. He apprehended the world as a persistent tremor, a resonance only he could decipher. He ambled along Main Street, the sun beating down like a forge on his nape. He observed knots of teenagers erupting in laughter outside the diner, the emphatic gesticulations punctuating a dispute near the hardware emporium. They were isolated entities, conversing in a dialect he could perceive but not comprehend. He strained to decipher their expressions, hunting for meaning, but the subtle shades forever eluded him. Outside of town's perimeter, the river beckoned, a muted throb against the land. He descended the slope, loose earth skittering underfoot. The riverbank provided a sanctuary, a haven where the vibrations softened, became predictable cadences. He settled onto a warm, smooth stone, extracting his well-worn notebook and a stunted pencil. He didn't inscribe words, not typically. He illustrated. He rendered the way sunlight splintered on the surface, the undulating flow of the current, the frantic ballet of the dragonflies. Yet today, he wrestled with something different, the sensation of music. He'd glimpsed it flickering on the television screen, a documentary on Johnny Cash. The visages in the audience, their bodies swaying in unison, it projected elation, unadulterated and pure. He craved that. He longed to perceive the music, beyond the blunt force of bass vibrating through a speaker. He outlined a guitar, then populated it with spiraling motifs, attempting to embody the invisible waves of sound. He incorporated a microphone, a looming, shadowed entity, and a figure poised behind it, an arm raised in what he envisioned as a gesture of potent resonance. He faltered, gnawing on the pencil end. It was off-key. The depiction felt sterile, devoid of animation. It failed to capture the sentiment he struggled to articulate, the yearning, the profound ache. His gaze drifted upward, snagged by a sudden flurry of activity on the opposite bank. A gathering of classmates was assembled there, dissolving into merriment and playful splashes. He recognized Sarah Miller, her flamboyant red hair secured in a ponytail, her smile a beacon. He ached to be among them, drawn into that effortless rapport, that seamless connection. He scrutinized them for an eternity, his chest constricting. They remained oblivious to his presence, absorbed in their world of shouts and mirth. He conjectured at their conversations, the shared witticisms, the whispered confidences. He attempted to lip-read, but it was futile across the expanse. The river, usually a balm, now resembled a barrier, a silent, rushing testament to his exclusion. He shut his notebook, the drawing incomplete. The sun had commenced its descent, painting elongated shadows across the water's face. He gathered his belongings, the river's solace tarnished, superseded by the familiar sting of solitude. He scaled the embankment, his steps leaden, the planet's vibrations now grating, an unremitting, deafening echo of the quietude within. The man in black arrives. The engine coughed, a metal lung desperately gasping for air, then died completely. Johnny Cash, perched on the edge of his seat, felt the bus shudder to a halt. Dust billowed around them, settling like a gritty shroud on the already sun-baked asphalt of the country road. "Well, damn," he muttered, pushing his black Stetson further back on his head. "Sounds serious, Mr. Cash," drawled Bob, his road manager, already halfway up the aisle. "Probably just a clogged fuel line. Happens all the time." Johnny wasn't so sure. The silence that followed the engine's death rattle felt heavier, more final. He followed Bob out into the oppressive heat, where the rest of the band and crew were already gathered, squinting at the engine compartment. "She's bleedin' all like a stuck pig," reported Luther Perkins, his guitar slung carelessly over his shoulder. "Looks like a busted hose, maybe more." Johnny ran a hand over his weathered face. They were miles from anywhere, judging by the endless fields of corn stretching to the horizon. "Nearest town? Harmony Creek, maybe 5 miles back," Bob offered, wiping sweat from his brow. "Sheriff's a good old boy. Might be able to rustle up a mechanic." 5 miles back in this heat? I ain't walkin', Luther grumbled. Johnny ignored him. Bob, you and Marshall go scout ahead. See if you can find a phone and someone who knows their way around an engine. The rest of you, stay put and keep an eye on things. He glanced at the sky, the sun a malevolent eye staring down. And stay out of the sun. We don't need anyone getting heatstroke. News traveled faster than dust devils in Harmony Creek. Mrs. Gable at the diner, bless her gossipy heart, was the first to spread the word. She'd overheard Bob's frantic call from the payphone outside, piecing together enough information to declare, with absolute certainty, that Johnny Cash himself was stranded just outside of town. Within minutes, the news had rippled through the sleepy town like a stone dropped in a pond. Kids on bikes peeled out, heading towards the county road. Old men abandoned their checkers games on the porch of the general store. Even Reverend Miller, mid-sermon preparation, paused, a flicker of something in his usually pious eyes. Billy, perched on the roof of his house, patching a loose shingle, saw the commotion. A swarm of dust-kicking vehicles was headed out of town. He couldn't hear what everyone was yelling, but he could feel the vibration of their excitement in the soles of his bare feet. Curious, he clambered down the ladder and grabbed his bike. Whatever was happening, it was clearly worth investigating. As he pedaled furiously down the long, dusty road, he could see the crowd gathering in the distance. Cars were parked haphazardly along the shoulder, their chrome glinting in the sun. And then he saw it, the black tour bus, behemoth stranded like a whale on the asphalt. And standing beside it, unmistakable even from a distance, was the man in black. A chance encounter at the diner. The bell above the door of the Silver Moon Diner chimed a tinny greeting as Billy pushed it open, the smell of frying bacon and stale coffee immediately enveloping him. He'd skipped lunch at school, the cafeteria a cacophony of clattering trays and shouted conversations that always left him feeling drained. The Silver Moon, usually quiet at this hour, was his sanctuary. He scanned the booths, relieved to see only a handful occupied. Then his gaze snagged. In the back, bathed in the muted afternoon light filtering through the dusty window, sat a figure that seemed to emanate stillness. A man in black, his face etched with lines that spoke of stories lived and hardships endured. Johnny Cash. Billy's heart stuttered. He knew that face, that voice, a voice that resonated deep within him, a voice that understood the loneliness he often felt. He'd seen him perform on television, mesmerized by the raw honesty in his songs. He hesitated, suddenly acutely aware of his own awkwardness. His worn jeans, his faded t-shirt, the way he always seemed to fade into the background. What would he even say? He wasn't good with words, especially spoken ones. His hands tightened around the strap of his backpack. Cash was nursing a cup of coffee, his gaze fixed on something outside the window. He looked tired. Defeated, almost. Billy wondered what had brought him to this small-town diner, so far from the bright lights and roaring crowds. He told himself to just order his usual burger and fries, to pretend he hadn't seen him. He could slip into a booth near the window and disappear, just like he always did. But the thought felt wrong, a betrayal of some kind. Something about the man's quiet strength, the sadness in his eyes, drew Billy in. An empathy he couldn't ignore. He felt a strange kinship, a sense that this man, despite his fame, understood what it was like to be an outsider. He took a deep breath, the scent of frying onions doing little to calm his nerves. He had to say something. Anything. He couldn't let this moment pass. With a surge of adrenaline, he walked toward the back booth, his sneakers silent on the checkered linoleum floor. Each step felt like a monumental effort, his ears buzzing with the amplified sound of his own heartbeat. He could turn back, he reasoned. No one would blame him. But the man in black lifted his head, his gaze meeting Billy's. There was no annoyance, no impatience, only a quiet curiosity. His eyes, a startling blue against the weathered landscape of his face, held a surprising warmth. Billy stopped beside the booth, his throat suddenly dry. He swallowed hard, his hand instinctively reaching for his hearing aid, as if to make sure it was still working. "Mr. Cash?" he managed to croak, his voice barely a whisper. Speaking without sound. Johnny watched the featureless asphalt unwind from the turbus window, each mile marker a metronome counting out the rhythm of another town, another gig, another echo chamber within his spirit. The lukewarm coffee in its cheap container offered no solace, its acrid steam failing to penetrate the ennui that had settled like a persistent fog. A hesitant touch on his forearm drew him back. Billy, ever-present notepad clutched in his hand, stood beside him, a question hanging in his gaze. He angled the pad towards Johnny. "Can we talk?" Johnny exhaled, a weary sound, but nodded. "Sure, kid. What's up?" Billy inhaled deeply, his hands fluttering. He began to sign, a silent ballet of fingers. Perplexed, Johnny's eyes flicked to the notepad as Billy wrote. "I know you don't understand. I'm deaf." A sharp pang of regret pierced Johnny's numbness. He'd registered Billy's quiet demeanor, but chalked it up to simple reticence. "Jesus, I didn't realize." Billy offered a small, non-committal nod. He resumed his signing, punctuating the gestures with occasional notes. "It's isolating. Like being trapped behind glass. The world goes on, conversations, laughter, melodies, but it's all muted. I see the expressions, but the words are lost. Lip reading is a guessing game. I miss so much." Johnny's expression softened, mirroring Billy's vulnerability. He recognized that ache of detachment, the feeling of being perpetually on the periphery. "I get it, kid," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "Knowing you're always on the outside looking in." Billy's hands moved with renewed urgency, his signing more emphatic. "The music. I feel the vibrations. The pulse of the bass. But it's not the same. I crave that connection. To share that experience. To belong." His shoulders slumped, his unspoken words heavy in the air. Sometimes I feel invisible." Johnny reached out, his hand settling on Billy's shoulder, a simple, wordless affirmation. "You're not invisible, Billy. You belong here. With us. This band, this crazy family." A thought ignited in his mind. "Teach me," he declared, pointing to Billy's hands. "Teach me to sign." Billy's eyes widened, a spark of hope flaring in their depths. He seized the notepad, his pen flying across the page. "Really? You'd do that?" Johnny nodded firmly. "Yeah. I would. Let's start with, hello." A genuine grin transformed Billy's face, illuminating his features. With meticulous care, he demonstrated the sign for hello, moving slowly and precisely. Johnny awkwardly attempted to mirror the action, his fingers clumsy and recalcitrant. A soft chuckle escaped Billy, and he gently repositioned Johnny's hand. For the next hour, Billy patiently guided Johnny through the fundamentals. Name, friend, music, understand. Johnny fumbled and stumbled, but Billy's patience never wavered, his enthusiasm infectious. The bus droned onward, the endless ribbon of highway unspooling before them. Yet within its confines, a new path was being forged, a bridge of understanding built on silent gestures and shared vulnerability. The poet of vibration. Johnny nursed his lukewarm coffee, the chipped ceramic mug warming his hands more than the liquid did his insides. Outside, the October wind worried the trees, stripping them of their leaves in furious gusts. He felt a kinship with those bare branches, stripped bare himself by the years, by June's absence, by the relentless demands of the road. Billy sat hunched at the far end of the picnic table, fiddling with a worn notebook. He hadn't said a word since Johnny had arrived. "What you got there, Billy?" Johnny asked, his voice raspy. Billy flinched, then slowly offered the notebook. "Just some things." Johnny took it, the pages soft and pliable with age. He flipped it open, his eyes scanning the cramped, uneven script. They weren't just words. They were raw emotion poured onto the page. Lines about the tremor of a train passing, the insistent thrum of cicadas in summer, the deep resonance of thunder echoing through the hills. One stopped him cold, the silence screams 1,000 names, each one a hammer to my soul. The world vibrates, a cruel game, where feeling's all I can control. He read it again, the weight of Billy's isolation pressing down on him. These are powerful, son. Billy blushed, his ears turning crimson. He signed, his hands fluttering nervously. Just feelings. Not real poems. Johnny shook his head, his gaze intense. Feelings are real, Billy. They're the only damn thing that is real sometimes. He tapped the page. You've got a way of putting them down, a way of making them sing, even without a melody. He thought about the vibrations Billy talked about, the way he seemed to perceive the world through a different lens. You feel the rhythm, don't you? The pulse of things. You hear the world in a way most folks don't. Billy nodded slowly, his eyes searching Johnny's face. He signed, I feel it, in my chest. Like a drum. That's the music, Billy. That's the music waiting to be heard. Johnny closed the notebook gently. You can't keep this to yourself. These words, they need to breathe. They need to find their way into other hearts. Doubt clouded Billy's face. He signed, but no one will understand. I'm different. Johnny reached across the table, his hand covering Billy's. Different is good, son. Different is what makes you special. And there's a whole lot of people out there feeling just as lost and alone as you do, people who need to hear what you have to say. Don't you rob them of that. He squeezed Billy's hand. Don't you rob yourself. Mocking silence. Johnny swirled the lukewarm coffee in his chipped mug, the diner's fluorescent lights reflecting in its murky depths. He watched Billy through the window, the boy's hands a flurry of motion as he talked to someone. The kid was good. Johnny could almost decipher the shapes, the urgency in the gestures. Suddenly, a raucous laugh cut through the morning quiet. Mark Olson and his usual entourage swaggered down Main Street, their eyes immediately locking onto Billy. Mark, a hulking figure even at 17, pointed a thick finger. Look at that, fellas. Thompson's talking to the air again. His friends erupted in snickers. One of them, a skinny kid with a greasy pompadour, mimicked Billy's signing, exaggerating the movements into grotesque caricatures. Ooh, look at me, I'm a bird. Chirp chirp. Billy's shoulders slumped. The energy seemed to drain from his face, leaving him pale and vulnerable. He tried to ignore them, turning his back, but Mark wouldn't let it go. Hey, Thompson. You trying to cast a spell or something? Maybe you can conjure up some friends who actually understand you. The laughter intensified, bouncing off the brick buildings, echoing the mockery in Billy's ears. Johnny felt a surge of anger, a familiar protectiveness rising within him. He started to push himself up from the booth, but he hesitated. He knew Billy needed to learn to handle these situations himself, as much as it pained him to watch. He saw Billy's hands fall still. The light in his eyes, the spark of communication, seemed to extinguish. He mumbled something to the person he was signing to, a quick apology that Johnny couldn't quite make out, and then turned and walked away, head down, shoulders hunched. Johnny watched him pass the diner window, his face averted. He looked like a shadow of himself. The person he was talking to, now alone, looked dejected and confused. Back inside, Johnny found Billy at their usual table, staring blankly at a napkin. His notepad lay untouched beside him. Johnny slid into the booth, the vinyl squeaking beneath him. Hey, kid, he said gently. You okay? Billy didn't look up. He just picked at a loose thread on the napkin, his fingers clumsy and uncertain. They're just being ignorant, Billy, Johnny continued, hating the inadequacy of his words. Don't let them get to you. Billy finally met his gaze, his eyes filled with a familiar pain, the kind Johnny knew all too well. It's hard, Johnny, he signed, his movements slow and deliberate, lacking their usual fluidity. It's like they're laughing at me for trying. For just being me. He picked up the notepad, then hesitated. Usually, he'd be scribbling furiously, pouring his thoughts onto the page. Now, he just stared at the blank paper, the pen clutched tightly in his hand. He set the pen down. I don't feel like writing anymore. His voice was barely a whisper. The mocking silence of the street had seeped into his soul, silencing his own voice, the one he was just beginning to find. A concert for the invisible. Johnny gazed through the diner window, the lukewarm coffee a meager defense against the deep-seated chill. Rain hammered the glass, reflecting the town's pervasive gloom. He yearned to disrupt the stagnant air, to shatter the heavy blanket of apathy. Pushing back his chair, the screech against the linoleum shattered the quiet murmur of the diner. "I'm putting on a show," he declared, his voice echoing more than intended. A few heads swiveled, fleeting curiosity sparking in their eyes before they returned to their meals. He didn't care. He needed the announcement to permeate. A showcase for the unseen. For those we routinely overlook. The notion thrummed within him as he headed toward Billy's house. He pictured a modest platform in the town square, bathed in the inviting glow of fairy lights, a sanctuary where Billy, and others like him, could finally be acknowledged. He found Billy in his room, hunched over his notebook, the rhythmic scratching of his pencil the only sound. "Hey, Billy," Johnny said softly, settling into a chair. "I'm organizing a concert. For the unseen. And I need you to be involved." Billy glanced up, his eyes widening momentarily before darting back to his scribbling. Johnny waited, allowing the silence to deepen. Finally, Billy slid the notebook across the desk. "Why me?" it questioned. "Because you possess a voice, Billy, a potent one. You perceive nuances others miss. And you deserve to be heard." Johnny leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. "I realize it's daunting. But envision it, sharing your poetry, your insights, anything you desire." Billy's fingers trembled as he wrote, "I'm not sure. What if they mock me?" "Then let them laugh, Billy. But they'll still have heard you. And perhaps, just perhaps, they'll glean something they never understood before." A spark of something akin to hope flickered across Billy's face. He nodded, almost imperceptibly. A genuine smile blossomed on Johnny's weary face. The following days became a blur of activity. Johnny secured the town square, procured a sound system, and festooned the area with lights. He caught only glimpses of Billy, the boy appearing to be everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Then, one afternoon, Johnny spotted Billy seated on a bench with Sarah Miller. Sarah was animated, her hands dancing as she signed rapidly. Billy, usually so reserved, was laughing. As Johnny drew closer, he noticed Sarah holding Billy's notebook, her finger tracing a line in a poem. She glanced up, her eyes shining. "This is incredible, Billy!" she exclaimed. "We just need to refine the rhythm a bit. And perhaps—" She trailed off, her brow furrowed in thought. Billy watched her, a subtle smile gracing his lips. For the first time, Johnny witnessed him truly at ease, genuinely connected. The concert for the unseen was taking shape, not merely on a stage in the town square, but within the quiet recesses of Billy's soul. The voice of silence. The atmosphere in the concert hall vibrated with a heavy gravity. Johnny's voice, a gravelly baritone etched with years, resonated through the space. Each song unfolded as a self-contained world, a sorrowful ballad, a rebellious shout for the marginalized. He sang of convicts, the oppressed, those lost in the system's cracks. "This one goes out to the unacknowledged," he declared, his gaze sweeping the audience, pausing momentarily on Billy. Rigid, Billy felt the bass notes reverberate through his very core. In his grip, his notebook bulged with observations, voiceless sentiments. A few rows behind, Mark Olson's crew leered, their expressions menacing. Billy tried to shut them out, instead focusing on the unvarnished passion emanating from the stage. "Ring of Fire," concluded, the subsequent ovation a thunderous wave that seemed to physically rock the structure. Johnny lifted a hand, silencing the crowd with a gesture. "I had a remarkable encounter earlier today," he confided, his tone hushed, almost confessional. "With someone who possesses a perspective I believe we could all benefit from. He may be a man of few words, but his heart speaks volumes." A chill ran down Billy's spine. He sensed what was coming. He just knew. "Billy Thompson, are you in the house?" Johnny's voice, amplified, became a sonic boom. A beam of light sliced through the darkness, pinning Billy in its glare. The room spun. Every pair of eyes in the auditorium seemed to burn into him. Mark Olson and his cohorts were guffawing, pointing fingers. Billy yearned to vanish, to merge with the shadows. His heart hammered, a frantic drum against his ribs. Johnny's gaze offered a steady anchor in the swirling disarray. "Come on up here, son! Share what you've got." He moved as though underwater, his limbs clumsy and unresponsive. He blundered onto the platform, the intense light searing his retinas. The microphone stood before him, a daunting, judgmental sentinel. Johnny placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Just speak it, Billy. Speak it as you wrote it." A stagehand materialized, bearing a tablet. Billy's poem, meticulously crafted, consumed the screen. Simultaneously, the lines appeared on an enormous screen behind Johnny, available for everyone to witness. He swallowed hard, the quiet suffocating. He looked at the piece, at the sentences he'd poured his essence into. He remembered the solitary tree in the park, resilient against the wind and rain. He thought of his mother, her unwavering affection a perpetual light. He considered Johnny, a legend who had truly seen him. He began to speak, his voice wavering initially, then solidifying with each syllable. The poem explored seeing the world through a different prism, discovering beauty in the ordinary, the unheard symphony within his mind. The words coursed outward, magnified, broadened, emblazoned for all to absorb. It was no longer simply his voice. It was the voice of the unvoiced, finally granted its chance to resound. Finding his community. The roar of applause surged around him, not the hollow mockery of before, but a tangible force that resonated through the floorboards and tingled in Billy's chest. Blurred faces swam into view, softened by the film of unshed tears, but within them, he glimpsed genuine delight. Sarah's hand tightened around his, her own eyes radiant. Even Mark Olson, looking abashed, offered a clap, though he seemed determined to conceal it behind a forced cough. The sensation was bewildering. A heady blend of exhilaration and trepidation. Part of him yearned to vanish, while another craved to be bathed in the warmth of their approval. Later, as the throng dissipated, Mark approached, scuffing the floor with his shoe. "Thompson," he mumbled, gaze averted. "That was something. Really something. I apologize for everything, you know?" He extended a hand, palm upward. Billy hesitated a moment before accepting it. Mark's grip was surprisingly gentle. "Thanks." Billy signed, then, recalling Mark's limitations, vocalized the word, rusty with disuse. "Thanks. I appreciate it." A novel concept bloomed within him, luminous and hopeful. He'd felt so isolated, so fundamentally different, but perhaps he wasn't. Locating Sarah, his fingers danced across his hands as he unveiled his proposition, a poetry circle. A haven where anyone who felt marginalized could voice their inner self, irrespective of the form it took. Sarah's expression brightened. They dedicated the subsequent hour to brainstorming, drafting eye-catching notices, and envisioning their inaugural gathering. The following week, the flyer, lovingly crafted with Sarah's assistance, was ubiquitous. The Silent Roar Poetry Circle, embrace your voice. Positioned outside the community center, Billy's pulse hammered in his ears as the initial attendees began to arrive. A girl adorned with vibrant pink tresses and a constellation of piercings, a boy perpetually cocooned in headphones, even indoors, an elderly woman with a spark of mischief in her gaze. They were all unique, just like him. Johnny sought Billy out a few days later, finding him swaying gently on the porch swing, notebook resting in his lap. The setting sun daubed the heavens with fiery hues. "Heard about this poetry thing of yours," Johnny commented, casually leaning against the railing. He appeared weathered, carrying more weight on his shoulders than Billy remembered. Billy's face split into a grin. "It's going well. Surprisingly well." Johnny gave a curt nod, inhaled deeply from his cigarette, and flicked the ash onto the ground. "I'm heading out, kid. Got a job opportunity further north." A wave of disappointment washed over Billy. "Oh." Johnny slapped him reassuringly on the shoulder. a surprisingly forceful gesture. Don't look so down. You're self-sufficient now, Billy. You've unearthed your voice. More importantly, you've discovered your tribe. He paused, his gaze fixed on the receding daylight. I used to see a wraith when I looked at you. Someone fading into nothing. Now, I see a blaze. Blaze brightly, kid. Johnny straightened, brushed off his well-worn jacket, and descended the porch steps. He pivoted once more, a faint smile gracing his features. Goodbye, Billy. Billy signed the words, his movements fluid and confident, and then echoed them aloud, his tone clear and resolute. Goodbye, Johnny. He watched Johnny's retreating figure, a lone silhouette etched against the encroaching dusk. He was embarking on a new journey, but Billy was firmly rooted. He was finally at home,